Young black boy aids elderly woman with car trouble one stormy night. Her response shocks the whole community. It was the kind of rain that made you pull your hood tighter, the kind that drowned every sound except thunder and regret. And yet, there he was barefoot, drenched, and unbothered, rushing across the flooded street toward a stranded woman who had no clue her entire world was about to shift. Elijah Davis was only 16, but storms didn't scare him. Not after the things he'd already weathered: his father's disappearance, his mother's exhaustion from working double shifts, and the cold looks he got every time he entered a store wearing his hoodie. The streets of Lockridge hadn't been kind to Elijah, but kindness still bloomed in him, fragile and fierce, like weeds breaking through concrete. That night, the rain was coming down so hard it looked like curtains falling from the sky. Elijah had just left the corner store where he'd picked up canned soup for dinner. As he turned onto Maplewood Avenue, a loud pop echoed, then a weaker sputtering sound. A beat-up silver sedan sat at an awkward angle near the curb, its hazard lights flashing, steam pouring from the hood. Inside, an elderly woman gripped the wheel with trembling hands. No one else stopped. Cars kept driving, headlights glaring through the storm as though she were invisible. But not to Elijah. He didn't hesitate. As he approached, the woman looked up, startled. Her gray hair was pulled into a bun, soaked now, and her hands were shaking so badly they couldn't even dial a phone. "Ma'am," Elijah called out gently, raising his voice over the thunder. "You okay?" She squinted through the rain. "My car just died. I think it overheated. And left my phone at home." Elijah gave a nod, already stepping around the car to lift the hood. A blast of steam hissed out, scalding and angry. "Radiator's busted. I don't think you can drive it like this." The woman's face fell. "I was just trying to get to my sister's. She's sick. I didn't think this storm would get so bad." Her voice cracked, and for a moment, Elijah saw past the pearls and pressed blouse. She looked lost. Alone. "Come on," he said, offering his hand. "Let's get you out of this rain. There's a diner 2 blocks down, stays open late. I'll walk you there." Her eyes widened. "I can't let you. You don't even know me." "You don't know me either," Elijah said with a quiet smile. "But you're somebody's grandma, and mine raised me right." She stared at him, then slowly took his hand. They made it to the diner soaked through, leaving puddles with each step. The waitress gave them a strange look, an elderly white woman arm in arm with a soaking black teen, but said nothing. They took a booth by the window, watching lightning streak across the sky. "I'm Mrs. Callahan," she finally said, her voice soft. "Elijah." She hesitated. "You remind me of my grandson. He would have been your age. Passed last year. Car accident." Elijah didn't know what to say, so he didn't say anything. He just listened, and something about his silence, his presence, seemed to ease her. She told him about her life in Lockridge, about growing up in a different time, about how she hadn't spoken to her sister in 6 years until that night. "It took her getting sick for me to swallow my pride," she said bitterly. "Now I don't even know if I'll make it there." "You will," Elijah said. "As soon as the storm clears, I'll find someone to help you tow the car. I got a friend whose uncle runs a garage." Her eyes searched his, confused. "Why are you doing this?" "Because people don't help each other enough anymore," he said simply. "And because you remind me of someone too." The storm didn't let up until morning. By then, Mrs. Callahan had dozed off in the booth, and Elijah had refused to leave her side. He stayed awake, keeping watch like a soldier on duty. When dawn broke, the diner's owner arrived and recognized Elijah. "You that Davis boy?" he asked warily. "From Willow Street." Elijah tensed but nodded. "Yes, sir." The man looked between him and the old woman, then muttered something under his breath before offering to call a tow truck on the house. "Your mama ever find that lost cat last month?" he added. Elijah blinked. Yeah, she did. Thanks." Word traveled fast in small towns. By the time the car was towed and Mrs. Callahan was back on her way to her sister's, the story had already made its way through the local coffee shop, barber, and church bulletin. But what happened next turned everything on its head. 3 days later, Elijah was walking home from school when a sleek black car pulled up beside him. The window rolled down, and there she was, Mrs. Callahan. But this time, she wasn't alone. A reporter from the local news station sat in the back seat with a camera, and beside her was a sharply dressed man holding a clipboard. "Elijah Davis?" the man asked. "We'd like to ask you a few questions about what happened the other night." Elijah's brows knitted. Why? Mrs. Callahan answered, her voice full of emotion. Because the world needs to know what real kindness looks like. You saved me, Elijah, and you didn't ask for anything. But I'm not going to let that go unnoticed. Within hours, Elijah's story was on the 6 o'clock news. Photos of him in the rain, grainy diner footage, a tearful interview with Mrs. Callahan, it all spread like wildfire. People began stopping him on the street. Strangers shook his hand. Some offered envelopes of cash. One woman from the church even dropped off a new pair of sneakers. But Elijah didn't care about any of that. All he could think about was how that one small act offering help when no one else would have cracked open something deeper in people. Something they'd forgotten. Compassion. Dignity. Humanity. What shocked the community even more came the following week, when the mayor held a ceremony to honor Elijah. He received a medal, a scholarship fund in his name, and a standing ovation that lasted longer than anything the town hall had ever seen. But it wasn't the medal that made Elijah tear up. It was the sight of Mrs. Callahan in the front row, hand over heart, mouthing words only he could read. Thank you for seeing me. And in that moment, Elijah knew, storm or no storm, sometimes the greatest rescue wasn't mechanical. It was emotional. It was spiritual. And it went both ways. Elijah never imagined his name would end up on a plaque inside town hall. The last time he'd been there, he was 8 years old, waiting while his mom applied for housing assistance. That building had always smelled like paper and lost hope to him. But that afternoon, as people clapped and camera flashes lit the room, it smelled like something else possibility. After the ceremony, Mrs. Callahan invited him and his mother over for tea. Elijah hadn't expected her house to be so warm. It wasn't just the cozy fireplace or the fresh-baked lemon loaf on the table. It was her. Something about her had softened. Or maybe something in him had opened. They talked like old friends, laughing, sipping tea, not mentioning the TV interviews or the scholarship, until she looked him in the eye and said, "You changed something in me." Elijah's mother smiled. He's always had a way of seeing people, even when they don't see him back. Mrs. Callahan's eyes misted. That night, I didn't just feel stranded on the road. I felt stranded for years. I built walls so high, I forgot what it was like to let someone in. There was silence for a beat. Then she reached across the table and gently squeezed Elijah's hand. You didn't just help me with a car. You helped me remember how to live. The next few weeks were strange. People who had once crossed the street when Elijah walked by now waved from their porches. Some teachers, who barely noticed him before, started calling on him in class. At first, it felt good. But soon, it became something else. Suspicion. Not everyone was thrilled about the attention Elijah was getting. A few kids at school accused him of staging the whole thing. One said he only helped the woman because he knew the cameras would show up. Another claimed Mrs. Callahan was just doing it for fame, that it was all a setup for sympathy. Elijah tried to ignore them, but the words still stung. One afternoon, as he sat alone during lunch, scrolling through hateful comments under the news clip, someone sat across from him. It was Jordan, a quiet kid from chemistry class who usually kept to himself. People are stupid, Jordan said, opening his lunch. They'll always hate what they don't understand. Elijah looked up. You believe me? Jordan shrugged. I believe in patterns. You've been picking up trash on campus since before this happened. I saw you give your jacket to a kid last winter. You didn't know anyone was watching. Elijah blinked. You remember that? Yeah, Jordan said. You're not new. Just finally seen. That moment stuck with Elijah. Maybe what mattered wasn't convincing everyone. Maybe it was just holding on to the truth when it tried to slip through your fingers. Meanwhile, something unexpected began to ripple through the community. Mrs. Callahan, once known as one of the more reserved members of the Lockridge Garden Club, had begun volunteering at the senior center. She started a knitting circle and offered rides to women who couldn't drive anymore. She even began mentoring younger women in the church choir, saying she wanted to give what she once withheld. One day, she stood up in front of the congregation at St. Luke's Church and gave a testimony that left everyone silent. I judged, she admitted, voice trembling. I looked at that boy and saw only what the world told me to see. But when the world turned away from me, he didn't. He saved Minute just from the rain, but from a colder storm I carried in my heart. That week, donations at the community center tripled. Churchgoers signed up in droves to visit the elderly. One man opened a food pantry in the basement of his barber shop. A woman on Main Street organized coat, drives for teens walking to school in the cold. All because one boy had stopped in the rain. But Elijah wasn't interested in praise. He was still hustling, helping at home, working weekends at a tire shop, and spending evenings tutoring his little brother, Isaiah. What he really wanted was peace. A place to grow. A future that didn't feel like dodging falling bricks every time he stepped forward. Then came the letter. He found it taped to the front door one Tuesday afternoon, inside a gold envelope with no return address. Inside was a handwritten note. Elijah, you don't know me, but I know you. I've watched this town long enough to recognize real change when I see it. I'm offering you a chance. Full ride. Private academy. Housing, tuition, everything. All you have to do is say yes. Details below. A friend. At first, he thought it was a prank. But as he read further, he realized it was real. A scholarship to Brookshire Academia private boarding school 2 hours away, known for sending kids straight to Ivy League colleges. No application process. Just an invitation. His mom was quiet for a long time when he showed her. I don't want to leave you and Isaiah, he said quickly. She shook her head. Elijah, we don't get doors like this. Not often. If someone's opening one for you, you walk through it. He wanted to. God, he wanted to. But something inside him wrestled with the idea. Would leaving mean forgetting where he came from? Would he become someone else entirely? The decision tore at him. He spent nights walking the neighborhood, revisiting corners he used to ride his bike through, porches where neighbors used to sit and shout greetings. But it all looked different now. Not because the streets had changed, but because he had. Mrs. Callahan could sense it too. Leaving doesn't erase your roots, she told him over tea. It grows them longer. You'll still be you, just reaching farther. Elijah stared into his cup. What if I don't belong there? You didn't belong in a thunderstorm either, she said. But you stood in it, and you changed lives. You belong wherever your heart leads you, Elijah. He said yes. The goodbye was harder than he expected. Isaiah clung to his waist at the bus station. His mom gave him a pair of worn gloves and told him to always keep his hands warm and his heart open. Mrs. Callahan slipped a small silver cross into his palm, whispering, You carry more light than you know. And then the bus doors closed. Elijah watched Lockridge fade behind glass, the rain beginning to fall again. Brookshire was a different world. Gated dorms, marble hallways, students with names like Sterling and Ellington. Elijah felt like he'd landed on another planet. But he adjusted. Slowly. Not by becoming someone else, but by being exactly who he'd always been. He joined the debate team, became a student mentor, helped organize a campus-wide food drive in his second month. Kids listened to him. Staff respected him. He began writing essays about social impact that caught the attention of national organizations. And still, every Sunday, a letter arrived from Lockridge. Mrs. Callahan, Isaiah, even Jordan. He read them like gospel. One night, after giving a talk on compassion and civic leadership, Elijah stood by the window of his dorm room, holding Mrs. Callahan's latest letter. You were the rain in my drought, she wrote. You were the boy who made me feel seen in a world that had forgotten me. And now, you are becoming a man who will not just pass through storms, but calm them. His throat tightened. Because she was right. Back home, the ripple continued. Inspired by Elijah's story, Lockridge High started a community service program. Teens volunteered at nursing homes, cleaned up parks, ran reading programs for younger kids. And every year, they gave out an award in Elijah's name, the Elijah Davis Heart of Change Scholarship. Mrs. Callahan became the keynote speaker. Standing at that same podium Elijah once did, she would tell new faces the same story. But she always ended it with a twist. You think he saved me? No, I was the one given a gift. Because on one rainy night, someone I was taught to fear offered me his hand. And that hand pulled me back to life. Elijah had never imagined a place like Brookshire could feel like home. But by the time spring rolled around, he wasn't just surviving, was thriving. His grades were top of the class. His essays were being featured in the school's national journal. He was invited to speak at a youth leadership conference in Chicago. Even the headmaster, a reserved man with a reputation for being cold, pulled Elijah aside one morning and said, Your presence here has reminded us all why education must also include heart. But despite the accolades, Elijah never stopped writing back to Lockridge. Every Sunday afternoon, without fail, he would sit by the west-facing window in the library and write his letters. He told Isaiah about the snowstorms, about the strange cafeteria food, and how he still missed his mom's cooking. He told Mrs. Callahan about the poetry club he had joined, and how her lemon loaf recipe had earned him the nickname Grandma's favorite in the dorm. And he told his mom everything, every nervous presentation, every late-night walk where he still questioned whether he deserved all of this. And her reply was always the same. You don't have to deserve it, baby. You earned it. That's different. But as time moved forward, so did life in Lockridge. One Sunday evening, Elijah received a letter unlike the others. It wasn't in Mrs. Callahan's familiar handwriting. It came from her niece. Dear Elijah, Aunt Claire has fallen ill. It's her heart. She's resting in the hospital now, but she keeps asking about you. She refuses to let go of that little silver cross you gave her last Christmas. If you can come, I know it would mean the world. With love, Jenna. The words hit him like a wave. Mrs. Callahan, the woman who used to avoid young people like him, who had once admitted she crossed the street to avoid boys in hoodies, now held on to his cross like it was life itself. He didn't hesitate. He arrived in Lockridge before sunrise the next day. The sky was tinged with violet, the streets still asleep. The town hadn't changed much, but he could feel something different in the air, like time was holding its breath. At the hospital, Elijah found her in room 312, asleep in a sea of white blankets. Her face was pale, her hair thinner, but her hand still clutched the silver cross. Just like the letter said. Hey, he whispered. Her eyes fluttered open, slowly, then suddenly wide. Elijah. He nodded, stepping closer. She began to cry softly, like rain on glass. You came. Of course I did. I thought I'd never see you again. And if there was something I needed to say. You don't need to, he said gently. You already did. In everything you've done. No, she said, gripping his hand. I need to tell you that I was wrong. About so much. About people. About how I saw the world. But the biggest mistake I ever made was thinking I couldn't change. That people like me don't get second chances. Elijah sat beside her, eyes misty. You didn't just change, Mrs. Callahan. You changed others. The town, the kids, me. She smiled through her tears. You gave me that chance. They sat in silence for a while, the steady beep of her monitor like a slow, honest heartbeat. Will you stay? She asked. I'll stay as long as you want me to. Mrs. Callahan recovered slowly, but steadily. The doctors said the worst was behind her, though she'd need help adjusting once she went home. Elijah took a leave from school to stay in Lockridge for a while. At first, he worried what people at Brookshire would say. Would he fall behind? Lose momentum? But none of that mattered when he saw her face light up every morning as he walked into her room with lemon tea and her favorite newspaper crossword. They talked about everything: his hopes, her regrets, the funny things Isaiah said in his letters, the way Lockridge was slowly transforming. And in those quiet days, Elijah realized something. Changing the world wasn't always about movements or speeches or news clips. Sometimes it was about choosing to love the people right in front of you, again and again. One evening, while walking back from the hospital, Elijah passed by the diner, the same one he and Mrs. Callahan had ducked into on that stormy night. It looked the same. The neon sign still flickered at the edge. But inside, he noticed something new, a framed photo on the wall. It was of him, 16-year-old Elijah, soaked from the storm, holding an umbrella over an old woman who looked equal parts shocked and grateful. The caption read, "Kindness is a storm too, only quieter." He stared at it for a long moment. His heart beat hard in his chest. He didn't know the photo existed, didn't know someone had been watching, but somehow it felt right. By the time Mrs. Callahan was discharged, she had a new chairlift in her house, a nurse coming twice a week, and a wall full of cards from people she hadn't spoken to in years. The community had rallied around her, not because of pity but because she had become theirs. And she had Elijah to thank for it. Before Elijah left to return to Brookshire, she gave him something wrapped in an old handkerchief. "Open it when you're ready," she said. He tucked it into his coat pocket and hugged her tight. Back at school, Elijah felt different. Not out of place but more whole, more certain of his roots. When he unwrapped the handkerchief a week later, he found a small, delicate photograph. It was faded but beautiful: Mrs. Callahan as a young girl, smiling on a porch swing beside her little sister. On the back, in her trembling cursive, were these words: "Before the walls, before the fear. Thank you for helping me find her again. Claire." As Elijah stepped into his senior year, his story began to spread beyond Lockridge. His essay about the night he helped Mrs. Callahan was published in a national magazine. He was invited to Washington, D.C. to speak at a youth summit. And later that year, he stood on stage at a civil leadership forum, delivering a message not just about justice but about seeing one another. The crowd rose to their feet when he said, "What changes a community is not force. It's not fear. It's the one moment when a soaked teenage boy offers his hand to someone society told him to fear. And she takes it." It wasn't just applause that followed. It was tears. It was silence. It was healing. When college admissions rolled in, Elijah had a dozen options: Yale, Stanford, Howard, and more. But he chose to attend a state university just 30 miles from Lockridge. Close enough to visit home. Close enough to keep giving back. He spent his weekends mentoring youth in the town he once felt invisible in. He helped create a scholarship in Mrs. Callahan's name for elderly women returning to education. And every fall, he returned to Lockridge High to speak to the new students about storms and second chances. And every year, at the annual scholarship gala, Elijah stood beside a smiling Mrs. Callahan, older, grayer, but radiant, as they handed the award to another student whose heart had changed the world in quiet, remarkable ways. But perhaps the most unforgettable moment came 5 years later. Elijah had just finished grad school and returned to Lockridge for the summer. He was visiting the local library when a boy, maybe 12 or 13, ran up to him breathless. "You're him, right?" the boy asked. "The one from the rain story?" Elijah smiled. "Yeah, I guess I am. My grandma told me about you," the boy said proudly. "She said you taught her that love doesn't come with warnings. It just shows up." Elijah knelt down. "What's your name?" "Marcus." "Well, Marcus," he said, "you know what's cool about storms?" The boy shook his head. "They don't last forever. But what you do in them, that does." And with that, he walked out into the sunlight, carrying every storm, every lesson, every face that had shaped him. Because in the end, Elijah wasn't just the boy who helped an old woman during a rainstorm. He was the boy who reminded an entire town what it meant to feel human again. The day Elijah received the photo, something in him shifted. He stared at the faded image long after the sun had disappeared behind the school's west tower. The past and present seemed to blur. Mrs. Callahan as a girl, full of light and laughter, before age and life had built barriers between her and the world. He thought about what she'd written. "Before the walls. Before the fear. Thank you for helping me find her again." That night, Elijah sat at his desk with a blank notebook in front of him. He wrote for hours paragraphs that poured out like breath held too long. He wasn't sure if it was an essay, a letter, or a speech. He just knew it was truth. He titled it, "The Night That Changed Two Lives." In the following months, that essay made its way to a national youth storytelling competition sent in by one of Elijah's teachers without his knowledge. It was selected as a finalist. The finalists were invited to New York City for a live event. Elijah had never flown before. He'd never even stayed in a hotel with room service. But there he was, standing backstage at a grand theater with velvet curtains and chandelier lights, holding a microphone in his sweaty hands. When his name was called, he stepped onto the stage. He looked out at a sea of faces, diverse, eager, expectant, but his eyes focused on the front row, where 3 seats had been saved. One for his mother, one for Isaiah, who kept bouncing in his chair from excitement, and one for Mrs. Callahan. She wore her Sunday best, light blue with white trim and a brooch shaped like a sunflower. She gave him a small thumbs up. He took a deep breath and began. "I was 16, cold and drenched, when I saw her for the first time. An elderly woman alone in a broken-down car during the worst storm of the year. No one else stopped. But I did. People ask me all the time why. Why did you help her? The truth is I didn't help her because I'm a hero. I helped her because someone once helped me when I felt invisible. I helped her because deep down, I knew how it felt to sit in a storm hoping someone might see you." That night, we saw each other. And that changed everything. He spoke for 12 minutes. When he finished, the room stood as one. Mrs. Callahan had tears running down her cheeks. Isaiah clapped so hard his hands turned red. His mother cried into a tissue and smiled at the same time, her whole body vibrating with pride. Elijah didn't win first place. But what he won was better: a standing ovation, an invitation to speak at TEDx Youth, and a letter from a high schooler in Ohio that said, "I was going to give up on people, on myself. But then I heard your story. And now I think I'll keep going. Back in Lockridge, the town had been watching. After the video went viral, the city council officially declared November 7th the anniversary of that stormy night as Elijah Davis Day. Each year on that date, the town hosted a community service event pairing teens with elderly residents for a full day of shared storytelling and joint acts of kindness, cleaning yards, grocery runs, baking sessions, gardening. Mrs. Callahan always kicked off the event with the same words. You don't have to save the world. Just see someone and choose to show up. In the spring of his senior year, Elijah was invited to meet with the governor as part of a statewide youth advisory board. The governor asked him bluntly, "What do you think today's youth need most?" Elijah didn't blink. "Someone to believe in them before they do something remarkable," he said. "Not just after." The room went quiet. The governor leaned back in his chair and nodded. "That," he said, "is wisdom." As Elijah prepared for graduation, his life was already filled with opportunities, college offers, speaking invitations, internship proposals. But something tugged at him. One afternoon, he sat with Mrs. Callahan on her porch. The dogwood tree was blooming. Bees buzzed nearby, and the scent of lavender tea lingered in the air. "I don't know which path to take," he confessed. "They all lead somewhere different." She sipped her tea. "Then take the one that leads you closer to yourself." "And how do I know which that is?" She smiled. "Whichever one reminds you why you stood in the rain." He didn't respond right away. He just nodded, letting her words settle like soil around the roots of something still growing in him. At graduation, Elijah stood as valedictorian. He wore a deep navy robe with gold trim. As he stepped up to the podium, he spotted Isaiah in the stands, now taller, wearing Elijah's old sneakers. His mother clutched her purse and wept into a handkerchief. Mrs. Callahan sat in the special guest section beside the principal. He spoke without a script. "We live in a world that often tells us to look out for ourselves. But what changed my life is that the greatest strength is looking outward. Not for recognition, not for reward, but because people are waiting for someone to see them. And sometimes, seeing someone is the first step to saving them. And sometimes it saves you too." The audience was silent at first. Then someone stood, then another, and another until the entire crowd was on their feet. As the applause washed over him, Elijah looked out and saw more than a crowd. He saw a town healed. He saw a future blooming. He saw what love could do when it simply refused to give up. Years passed. Elijah Davis, once the quiet kid from Willow Street, had grown into a man whose voice carried across classrooms, boardrooms, and broken hearts. But no matter where life took him, from college lecture halls to international conference, she never forgot the feeling of that storm. That soaked through, heart-pounding moment when he reached out his hand and changed two lives at once. He graduated from university with honors in social work and community leadership. Instead of chasing a high-paying job, Elijah returned to Lockridge. Not because he had nowhere else to go, but because he chose to plant roots where he once felt invisible. With a grant funded by donations inspired by his viral story, Elijah opened a small nonprofit called Second Light, a community center built on one simple idea. Everyone deserves to be seen. Everyone deserves to feel needed. And healing begins when we sit down and listen. The first program Second Light launched was a youth elder storytelling circle. Twice a week, teenagers and seniors came together to share their lives, no phones, no judgment, just truth. A former janitor talked about how he once built model airplanes in secret because no one thought he was smart enough for engineering. A 16-year-old girl confessed that she didn't believe adults ever truly cared until she met a 91-year-old woman who remembered everything she said, week after week. Tears flowed. Laughter echoed. Healing happened. And sitting quietly in the back taking notes, handing out tea, sometimes just listening, was Elijah. He didn't need to be the center of the story anymore. He had become the keeper of others. Mrs. Callahan remained a part of his life throughout. She attended the first ribbon cutting for Second Light, standing proudly as she whispered, "You built a place I never knew I needed." Over time, her steps grew slower, her handwriting more fragile, but her mind was as sharp as ever. Every Thursday afternoon, she led a knitting circle in the back room. It wasn't really about the knitting, though. She told stories, some painful, others funny, all honest. And the kids listened. Even the ones who used to roll their eyes at anything old people say. Because Claire Callahan wasn't just a woman with gray hair anymore. She was a woman with history and a heart that had survived its own storm. One crisp fall morning, Elijah arrived at the center early. The sky was clear, sunlight stretching across the old community mural he and a group of kids had painted the year before, a scene of hands reaching across generations, beneath words that read, "The future is something we build together." As he unlocked the front door, he found a small package waiting for him. No name, just a short note. "You changed my life. I never got to say it out loud, but I hope this helps someone else. Grateful." Inside was a check for $50,000. Elijah stood frozen in the doorway, the paper trembling in his hands. That afternoon, he created the Open Doors Fund, a scholarship and emergency support grant for elderly residents in crisis and underprivileged youth with urgent needs. Rent, books, medication, counseling. No strings attached. Just help, like the kind he once gave, barefoot in the rain. But time, even when sweet, is never still. One winter, Mrs. Callahan grew weaker. She could no longer lead her knitting group. Some days, she forgot the names of people she loved. On others, her stories came back with vivid clarity. Elijah visited her every weekend, brought her apple turnovers, read poetry aloud, played old jazz records on a portable speaker beside her bed. One quiet afternoon, as snow tapped softly on the windows, she turned to him and whispered, "Promise me something. Anything. Don't stop walking in the rain." He furrowed his brow. "What do you mean?" "I mean, don't let the world make you dry. Don't forget that wet, wild feeling. That boy who stopped without knowing what would come next. Keep being him." He nodded, eyes shining. "I promise." She smiled, closed her eyes. And that was the last thing she ever said. Her funeral was held in the same church where she once stood and admitted her fears, her failures, and her transformation. Now, the pews were filled with people from all walks of life. Black, white, young, old. Every one of them had a Mrs. Callahan story. Elijah spoke last. He didn't use a microphone. He didn't need one. "She taught me that change is never too late. That forgiveness can be born from rain. That we all get lost sometimes, but sometimes being found starts with something as simple as a hand offered in the dark." She used to think she was too old to matter, too hardened to heal, too far gone to return to love. But she came back, and she taught us all how. Years later, people would still talk about that night in the storm, the boy and the old woman, the car, the rain. Some would call it luck, others, fate. But Elijah knew better. It wasn't magic. It was a choice. A small act with a big echo. On the 10-year anniversary of Elijah Davis Day, the town unveiled a bronze statue in front of the community center. It showed two figures, a teenage boy in a hoodie holding an umbrella, and an elderly woman in a dress reaching out her hand. Beneath it, a plaque read, "Compassion does not need an invitation. It only needs a willing heart." Elijah stood beside Isaiah, now a young man in college. His mother wiped away tears. Dozens of kids gathered around him, phones out, but quiet. One little girl tugged at his sleeve. "Mr. Elijah," she asked, "is that really you?" He crouched down, smiled. "That was me. A long time ago. Why did you stop in the rain?" He thought for a moment. "Because I wanted someone to feel safe, even if just for a minute." The girl nodded thoughtfully. "I want to do that too." Elijah placed a hand on her shoulder. "You already are." That night, long after the crowd had gone, Elijah walked home through a light drizzle. He didn't pull up his hood, didn't run for cover. He just walked slowly, intentionally, letting the rain kiss his face. And as he turned the corner onto Willow Street, he whispered to the wind, "I'm still here, still walking in the rain, just like I promised." And somewhere in the hush of the night, if you listened closely, you could almost hear her voice again. Proud, peaceful, free. The end.